Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we will try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the center-state relations in a specific reference to the financial aspect. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the tribes in India, the related challenges and the way forward. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026 along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to decoding the center-state fiscal tug-of-war. Different political systems around the world can be primarily categorized into 2 ways. Either they can be unitary systems or they can be federal systems. When I'm talking about the unitary system, what I'm trying to say is that there is just the existence of a single union government, the central government, and it has all-encompassing powers. If at all there is the existence of a state government or a provincial government, the powers are derived from the central government. Whereas in a federal setup, there is a clear demarcation of powers and jurisdiction between the central and the state government. But when we talk about India, there is Article 1, which says India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. Here what we see is a kind of a centralizing tendency, which even Ever Jennings talked about. And we had different political scientists, for example, K.C. Ware, terming the Indian structure as a quasi-federal system. Then we had Morris Jones talking about bargaining federalism. And ultimately we had the views of Granville Austin talking about cooperative federalism, which was incorporated by the Niti Aayog. Now what you have to understand is that we have a centralizing tendency. We have a unitary bias when we talk about the constitutional structure in India. And that is manifested in different ways. For example, the appointment of governors, or more number and more important subjects in the union list, or the emergency provisions. But there is one very important aspect where we see very good manifestation of this difference. That is the financial aspects, where center has a dominance over the revenue generation and states are more dependent upon the center. And that has led to a lot of differences between the center and the states. See, please understand, we have Article 280, which talks about the Finance Commission. And Finance Commission basically recommends the distribution of the net proceeds of taxes, right? Which basically is derived from Article 270, which talks about the net distribution of taxes, proceeds of taxes between the center and the states. On whose recommendations? On the recommendations of the Finance Commission. But what we see is that the states have very less resources of their own, and they have to then depend upon the center. If I were to give you the number, when we talk about the revenue generation, the center generates almost 60% of the total revenues, whereas it is the states where the expenditure, where the responsibility of the expenditure goes to almost 60%. So they're basically generating just 40%, but they have to spend more than 60%, the states. So there is a kind of disparity which is there. So in this particular article, we have the Karnataka Chief Minister who has met the members of the Finance Commission and has suggested some reform measures. How to basically balance this aspect of fiscal relationship. So this is again a very important part of center-state relations, dealing with GS2, center-state relations, and GS3 also, Indian economy resource mobilization. So what we'll see is, we'll see the status as of now. We'll delve into the constitutional articles, and we'll see what is the issue with these states, what is the position of the center, and what should be the way forward. I hope this is clear. It is one of the very important topics, and probably a question can come from this particular area. Now, when we talk about the Indian Constitution, as I told you, that we have a quasi-federal structure. That is, there is a unitary bias which is present. And the center, or what we call as the union, it has primacy with respect to most of the subjects mentioned in the Constitution. Right? Next aspect is that when we specifically talk about the financial sphere, the center has a dominance. You talk about more important tax revenue. You talk about more important subjects in the union list. You talk about revenue generation through cess and surcharges. It is the dominance of the center. Now, what you have to understand is that on one hand, we have the center who's having more of resources, more of avenues to collect the resources. On the other hand, we have the states who are actually the real implementers on the ground. Take, for example, the health, education, water, sanitation and hygiene, employment, job creation. Who is responsible? It is the states who are basically playing the most important role in the democratic governance and citizen engagement. So over here, the importance lies of the states, but they do not have their own resources. Next aspect is that it creates an asymmetry between the center and the states because of this imbalance. On one hand, you have the structural authority. The center is having the structural authority with respect to the collection of the most important tax revenue sources. And it is basically deciding that how these resources would be distributed. On the other hand, we have the functional responsibility with the states who do not have the adequate resources of their own, but still have to implement some of the very important aspects of human development. So here is a quite lot of disparity which is there, right? Now, how we can see the manifestation of the center as a dominant player in this aspect. The very first is dominant tax handles. We have the 7th schedule, article 246, where we have the union list, the state list and the concurrent list. Now, the most important subjects with respect to the overall governance, they are in the union list first of all. And then the most important sources of revenue, the tax bound sources, important bound revenue sources, they are basically in the union list. Take for example the income tax, corporation tax. These are high yield sources. The states do not have such same tax collection avenues. So here lies the stark difference. Then we have the fiscal transfers. Look, this is very important. As I told you, we have article 270, which talks about the distribution of the net proceeds of taxes. Now, first of all, what are these taxes? As I told you, for example, the income tax, corporation tax, the center's GST, CGST, the center's share of IGST. So it is basically a large amount. Now, on whose recommendation we have basically the distribution of these proceeds? It is basically the Finance Commission, which is constituted under article 280. Now, the difference is between the center and the state when we talk about the powers. That first of all, the Finance Commission is exclusively constituted by the center. There is no stakeholder approach. That is, the center is not consulting the states with respect to the appointment of the members of the Finance Commission. That's the first thing. Second thing which you must remember is the terms of reference. That is, when a Finance Commission is constituted, it is basically given a term of reference, and that is decided by the center. So we have no participation of the state. There is no stakeholder mechanism which is there in this aspect, right? Devolution and grants, both are recommended by the Finance Commission. Now, when I'm talking about the grants, I'm talking about article 275, right? Grants and aid. But again, understand, these are just recommendations. See, definitely Finance Commission is a constitutional body. The center is unlikely to basically disregard the recommendations of the Finance Commission. But these are just recommendations. And if the terms of reference have been specified by the center, why would it negate the recommendations of the Finance Commission? But you have to understand that the implementation of the recommendations and the timing, it is both governed by the center. And therefore, there is this particular imbalance which is created. Now, one more aspect which I would like to clarify here is with respect to the vertical devolution and the horizontal devolution. Now, these are basic concepts, but still I would like to recap for you. The vertical devolution is primarily referring to the distribution of the net proceeds of taxes between the center and the states. Whereas horizontal is talking about the distribution among the states. I hope that is clear. Now, when I'm talking about the vertical devolution, now these data, this particular infographic is really very important. You need not to mug up the data sources, but again, understand that this is a very important component to understand that what is the position. Before that, I would also like to tell you about the cess and surcharges. So we have article 269 and 70, which talks about cess and surcharges. Cess and surcharges are basically tax on tax. The revenue which the center generates from the cess and the surcharge, it is not a part of the basket, the pool of resources which are to be shared between center and states. So whatever the center is earning on the basis of cess and surcharge, it is going on its part. Now, one thing which you have to understand is with time, the dependence of the center has increased with respect to cess and surcharge. Look at this particular graph. So when we talk about, the very first thing is the share of the divisible pool. Now, if you see the share, it's in blue color, it has been basically reducing. Look at this. It has basically reduced. The share of the states it is continuously reducing. When we talk about the cess and surcharge, see, it's continuously increasing, the red part. So again, understand, when we talk about the overall as a number, I'll tell you, in financial year 2024-25, almost 23% of the gross tax revenues of the center, they were in the form of cess and surcharge. And those are the resources which are not to be shared between the center and the states, solely goes to the center. So the center is becoming more and more dependent upon the cess and the surcharges. Now that's the aspect of this. Let's talk about the vertical devolution. As I told you, that there is the overall share of the states, it's reducing. The Finance Commission, the 15th Finance Commission, it basically recommended the share which is to be given to the states as 41%, right? 41%. But what is the real picture? I'll tell you. In financial year 2024-25, the center's total revenue, tax revenues amounted to almost 38.8 lakh crores, just a number. And the share which was given to the states was almost 12.2 lakh crores. Now, it is basically nothing but 32%. Can you see the difference? Finance Commission recommended that 41% should go to the states. But what is the real picture? It's 32%. And the reason is the cess and surcharges. So that is the whole picture. I hope it's clear. Now, when I talk about the horizontal devolution, the Finance Commission uses different parameters. These parameters are mentioned here. You can have a look. So, for example, we have the income distance, we have population, both of 71 and 2011, area, forest cover, forest and ecology, infrastructure, fiscal discipline, demographic performance, tax efforts. Now, Finance Commission has to make sure that there is equity in the distribution. Now, when I'm talking about the equity, what it means is that those states which are lagging behind in the developmental path, they should be given more resources. And what can be the parameter for that? It should be, for example, the population or the area or the forest cover. Then there are aspects of efficiency, that the states who are more efficient, they should be also given due credit. For example, we have the tax effort, that is the tax collection efficiency. We have demographic performance. For example, reduction of the fertility rates. Right? For example, we have these states in South India. They have really worked hard when we talk about the family planning measures and were able to control the fertility rate. So they should be given the adequate credit. And it is for that reason that the 15th Finance Commission, look at this, it has considered the demographic performance to the weightage of 12.5% and tax effort as 2.5%, which was not considered by the 14th Finance Commission. And the income distance. What is income distance? Let's say we have Haryana as the state with highest per capita income. Now, if that is the level of Haryana, let's say this is the base level and we are having Haryana at this particular level, per capita income. And we have, for example, UP over here, the per capita income of UP. This is the income distance, the distance between this point and this point. Higher the income distance, more the resources would be given to that state. So this is the aspect of equity which the Finance Commission looks into account. But what the states in South India says, that you have these states of North India, they did not take adequate efforts with respect to the population control measures. And now you are basically giving them more resources because they are underdeveloped or they are not that developed with respect to the states in comparison to the states of South India. So that is a concern, right? So this is just for the sake of your knowledge base. I have provided this particular table. You can have a look. We have income distance. We have as 45%, which was recommended by the Finance Commission. Then we have 15% of the population, which is being considered as a factor. 2011, 1971 was not considered. Then we have the area, 15%. We have the forest and ecology, which basically talks about the share of the dense forest in the overall dense forest of the country, right? So these are the factors. Now look at this, very important data. The amount in rupees each state got for every rupee they contributed. Let's say I as a state A is contributing 5 rupees. In return, how much I am getting? Look at this. You have the state of Bihar contributed 1 rupees and how much it got in return? 7.06 rupees. That is why we have the states in South India who are saying you are rewarding underdevelopment. You're not rewarding the efficiency. Look at Uttar Pradesh. For every rupee contributed by the Uttar Pradesh, it got 2.73 rupees. And just have the stark difference with respect to Kerala. For every rupee Kerala basically contributed, it just got 0.57 rupees. And the number would reduce. Look at this for Karnataka. For every rupee it gives, it only gets 0.15. And it's even lower for Maharashtra. So that is the kind of picture which you have to see. And see this. The share of the states in the divisible pool of taxes. Again, the infographic is to help you to understand the present situation. The share of the states in the divisible pool has consistently reduced. Look for Karnataka, C for Kerala has reduced, for Tamil Nadu has reduced, Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh remains almost same, Rajasthan remains almost same, Bihar has reduced some, and then we have Maharashtra, almost it has come to the same level. So that is the overall picture. Now, dominance, the next point is dominance in the GST Council. Look at this. When we talk about the GST Council, the center has a voting share of 1/3, whereas the state has 2/3. But in order to pass a particular mandate, there is a need of 75% vote support, which means that the center has to agree on that. Even if the states are all combined, they would not be able to pass a resolution until the states, until the center agrees upon that part, right? So we have GST Council. You can just have a look with respect to the prelims related aspects. Next, we have cess and surcharge. I already explained. We have Article 269 and 70. Cess and surcharge are nothing but tax on tax. The proceeds of cess are for a specific purpose. For example, Krishi Kalyan cess, education cess. Surcharge is not for any specific purpose, but both the amounts which is collected from the cess and surcharge, it goes to the Consolidated Fund of India. Very important fact. Remember, proceeds exclusively to the center. And therefore, what we see is that the share of the states has been reducing. Then we have borrowing powers. When we talk about Article 292, the Constitution gives extensive borrowing powers to the center. It can borrow from outside. But that is not same with the states. So that is a kind of a restriction imposed upon the states. Then we have emergency provisions. We have financial emergency, Article 360, where the center can basically direct the state to observe the principles of financial propriety, or to basically reduce the salaries of state employees. So that is a power which union has. I hope this is clear. Now coming to the next part. States as real arenas of governance and economic activity. What we are trying to say is that though center has a dominance with respect to the collection of revenue sources, but when it comes to the expenditure, it is the state who are the real pillars. So they should be having that particular free domain with themselves. They should be having that autonomy with themselves. And they should not be basically treated as just mere appendages to the center. And that is what even Supreme Court in S.R. Bomey said, that states are not mere the appendages to the center. They have their own constitutional existence. And federalism was basically proclaimed as a part of the basic structure in this particular case. So I hope you understand this. First is extensive expenditure responsibilities. As I already told you, when we talk about the overall expenditure, almost more than 60% of the overall expenditure, it's borne by the states. But when we talk about the overall revenues which are coming to the states, it's just 40%. Right? So there is a difference. Core welfare developmental functions, be it health, be it education, be it agriculture, be it the employment generation, be it water, sanitation and hygiene, who are at the center? It is the states which are the real implementers and are the centerpiece of the democratic framework and the citizen engagement. Next, we have grassroots implementation. We have a lot of central schemes. For example, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Then we have Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. We have Jal Jeevan Mission. In most of these missions, which are nothing but centrally sponsored scheme, the credit is taken by the center. But what you have to understand, that with respect to the contribution to the overall functioning of these schemes, and also with respect to the implementation, it is state-led. When we talk about the administrative functioning, the participation of local governments, who does that? It is the states. Then we have democratic accountability. We have the local population, right, in every state. That is primarily concerned with the real issues, be it job creation, be it cleanliness, be it health, education. Now, again, understand, if the states do not have their own resources, if they do not have adequate resources, they would not be performing better. And that is what would be reflected in the results also. So that is one of the very important aspects. State elections basically deal with the local development, and it is primarily a domain of the states. And this establishes states as the primary arenas of the development. And this is one of the very important pictures taken from the Mint. It says that the fiscal deficit of the states has been continuously increasing. Look at this in the blue. The fiscal deficit of the states have been continuously increasing. States' own tax revenues, they have increased, but the rate at which the fiscal deficit is increasing, it is more. What it means? That it is now becoming more dependent upon the center, more dependent upon the borrowing aspects. So I hope this is clear. Next aspect is concerns in the center-state financial relations. The very first is erosion of state autonomy. What center is doing is, what union government is doing is that it is getting more dependent upon the centrally sponsored schemes. And these centrally sponsored schemes, first of all, adequate credit is not being given to the states. These schemes are being termed in the name of Pradhan Mantri. There have been allegations. But what you have to understand is that there is also the participation of the states. So there has to be the adequate voice of the states. But many a times these centrally sponsored schemes, they have conditionalities that we will give you this amount if you do this. That basically restricts the choices of the states. See, Kerala has its own different aspirations, its own needs than UP. So we cannot have the same conditionalities, one size fits all approach. We cannot have that. Next, we have vertical fiscal imbalance. There's a mismatch between centers' revenues and states' expenditure, already told that 60 and 40%, right? And it creates ultimately a dependency upon the center. Then we have regional disparities. So many times the states have alleged that, first of all, you are constituting the Finance Commission and all the members are being chosen by you. There is no stakeholder approach. You're not including the states. You're not consulting. And the kind of recommendations which you are giving, the Finance Commission, that is not reflecting the realities of the society. Because right now, it is the states who are basically bearing the most of the responsibilities with respect to different domains of health, education. So give more resources, right? So there have been allegations, do not adequately reflect their financial needs, and there are concerns with respect to fairness and transparency in the allocation. Even if the Finance Commission gives the recommendations, what about the implementation? What about the timings? That is a very important concern. Then we have borrowing restrictions. I told you about 292. It gives extensive power to the union. But when we talk about the states, what you have to understand is that it is restricted. The borrowing domain is restricted for the states. Let's say you have a particular state which has already borrowed money from the government of India or on the securities of government of India. Now, if it wants to borrow more, it would have to seek the approval of the center. What happened with the Kerala? I hope you know that. Try to link the issues, and that is how you'll be able to come at a multi-dimensional analysis. See, believe me, GS is all about having a multi-dimensional point of view. The more perspectives you have, the better number, the better reward you're going to get in the examination. Next, we have the uncertainty in GST revenues. We all know that previously the states had this particular expectation that after the GST is going to come, we are going to have more of resources. But that hasn't happened. And there were also the issues with respect to the compensation. Timely compensation was not given to the states by the center. Timely and adequate revenue distribution is not there. There are issues with respect to the functioning of the GST portal or the return filing. So there are a multitude of these issues. Now, what should be the way forward? Now, before I discuss the way forward, over here, let me talk about the article. And that is how you'll have to use the information which is there in the article, right? Many a time students have this confusion that how to basically extract the information. Look at this. Karnataka has basically suggested some of the reform measures. The CM of Karnataka, Siddaramaiah. So what he has said is that they have demanded larger allocation for the state from the central pool for the 5-year period beginning the April 1st, 2026. So one thing which you must remember is that the 16th Finance Commission has already been constituted under the chairmanship of Arvind Panagaria, and the timings and the duration of the Finance Commission, the recommendations on which the Finance Commission would work would be from financial year 26 till 31, right? Now, what Karnataka has proposed that the share of the taxes devolved to the states, vertical devolution, be increased to at least 50%. What was said by 15th Finance Commission? 41%. Now they're saying increase it to 50%, one of the recommendations. Also recommended that the next thing, yes, important, and the cess and surcharges be capped at 5%. What percentage I gave you? It is 23% as of now of the gross tax revenue. So cess and surcharges, they are at least 23%. So it has to reduce to 5%, what Karnataka has suggested. The state also recommended that including the union non-tax revenue in the divisible pools. So you have the tax sources, you have the non-tax sources, right? So that should be also included. For sharing funds among the states, that is the horizontal devolution, Karnataka suggested that each state should retain 60% of what it is contributing, with 40% going to the less developed state. This would basically balance the aspect of growth and equity. I hope this is clear. Then what it said, to make the formula fairer, Karnataka has proposed reducing the weight of the income distance criteria. I told that larger the income difference, larger the income distance, then more resources are going to go to that particular state. For example, let's compare UP with that of Haryana. The income distance is this much. When we compare Bihar, it's more. So larger the income distance, more resources are going to go. So what Karnataka has suggested is reduce this particular factor, the weightage given to this factor, and give more importance to efficiency. Reward those states who have contributed to the overall development, right? Giving more weightage to states' economic contribution, high-performing states are not penalized but encouraged. Critical reforms to make the fiscal devolution system more growth-oriented, predictable and fair. Then the CM told the Commission that the state recommends replacing the discretionary special grants with a formula-based allocation of 0.3% of the gross union receipts. You must be aware that we have the discretionary grants, statutory grants 275, and also we have discretionary grants. The union government is now more dependent upon the discretionary grants because so that it can have a political control over different states. That is one of the reasons, right? So what Karnataka CM has said is that this discretionary grant should be reduced. Now, what should be the way forward? The very first is enhance the resource devolution. Though the Finance Commission, 15th Finance Commission recommended the vertical devolution to be 41%, states demand further increase. As Karnataka is saying, increase it to 50%. Strengthen fiscal decentralization. There has to be greater autonomy with respect to taxation and expenditure decisions. Conditionalities must not be imposed. More autonomy should be given. Local needs should be given preference. For example, we have Canada. In Canada, we have the provinces which are allowed to basically have their own tax revenue sources. Taxation powers. Now, if you, again understand, if you change the constitutional structure, if you bring amendments and allow the states to have their own resources, definitely they would not be dependent upon the center. So this can possibly be done. Then we have the reframing of the center's role in joint scheme. We have these joint scheme, centrally sponsored schemes. There needs to be equal visibility and credit with respect to these initiatives. Current model, it's basically creating the fiscal dependency. Conditionalities are being imposed. They're being told what to do, what not to do. Ideally, the states should be autonomous in this aspect, but no. And it's also causing political friction, especially when we are talking about the opposition-ruled states. Reconstruct the fiscal federalism policy. Center should act as a constitutional facilitator. Very, very important. It should not decide. It should not have this aspect, this role of deciding everything. Rather, it should facilitate because the real implementers are whom? It's the state. Because the real delivery lies with the states and panchayats. For example, we can effectively use GST Council. We can use this constitutional aspect of interstate council. Why we are not using it? We should use it, right? So as to have a more stakeholder approach. Then we have adopt a true partnership model. For example, let's talk about fiscal planning or revenue sharing or scheme design. There has to be the adequate participation of the state. Cooperative federalism should be followed in letter and spirit, not just in the wordings of Niti Aayog. So if you really want to follow cooperative federalism, make states the real stakeholder. They need to be consulted, equal stakeholders. Transparent revenue sharing mechanisms for fair and predictable resource revenue sharing. GST Council should be focusing upon more inclusivity. You are having this dominance of the center with respect to the voting power. So that should not be there. Without center's approval, nothing can happen in GST Council. So that's something which has to be rectified because in a federal setup, as said by the Supreme Court also in S.R. Bommai, also talked about this particular aspect by Dr. Ambedkar, where Dr. Ambedkar emphasized that the states are not subordinates to the center. They have their own constitutional existence. So we need to focus upon that. Bring in more inclusivity, bring in more participation and fiscal transparency. So the picture is that we already have the center dominance when we talk about the center-state relations, but one of the very important aspects is fiscal relations. And over here, we have some of these recommendations. Please, this topic is really very important and possibly a question can come even in this mains, right? Let's have a mains practice question. The evolving nature of center-state fiscal relations in India has significant implications for cooperative federalism. Critically examine this statement in the context of recent trends in fiscal devolution, recent trends. That is the reason I gave you the infographic, and suggest measures to strengthen fiscal federalism. Again, guys, this particular mains practice question is for you. Please try to write the answers because in the mains, what really matters is what kind of answer, to what level, the quality of your answer decides whether your name would be in the list or not. So this is really very important. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and let us know in the comments. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to tribes, the guardians of the greens. Tribes are characterized by their own ways of living, what we call as their own customs and tradition. But what we have been observing in the last decades including those of the British times, is that tribes have been the most exploited section, the most vulnerable. The benefits of developments were shared by the mainstream population, but the brunt of economic development, it has been suffered by these tribal groups. So looking into this aspect, we have had this categorization of the scheduled tribes by the constitution makers. And in 2006, we had a very, very important act so as to recognize the individual and community rights of the tribals. Mostly the rights over the land on which they have been living for years. And this particular act is the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act of 2006. Now what you have to understand is that the implementation of this right is with respect to the states and the district administration. But since last 19 years, the implementation has been lackadaisical. It has not been very good. Therefore, we have the center coming up with a particular structural mechanism so as to create the Forest Right Acts cells in the districts and in the states. The center is now going to basically fund this particular FRA cells. But the question has come from many critics that why the center is basically interfering in this particular domain, because ultimately it is a responsibility of the states and the district administration. That is one of the critical aspects. So we have this particular article which says, in a first since the Forest Rights Act came into being in 2006, the union government has started funding the structural mechanism to facilitate the implementation of the law, to give these scheduled tribes and forest dwelling communities their own rights. Implementation of the Forest Rights Act for the last 19 years has been the domain of the states and the UTs. We have a new mission, possibly a question can come in the prelims, and that is how you extract the information. Dharti Aba Janjatiya Gram Utkarsh Abhiyan, DAJGUA, a central scheme. The Union Ministry of Tribal Affairs has so far sanctioned the setting of 324 district level FRA cells and almost 18 states and union territories into implementing this particular law. So what you have to understand, the main implementing agencies till now were the states and the UTs. And still they are. But right now, the center is coming up with a particular mechanism so as to expedite this particular act. But many critics, what they're saying is why the center is infringing in this particular domain. In addition, state-level FRA cells have been sanctioned for 17 of these states and union territories. I already told you about this particular act. This law mandates the state government to set up the structure for processing the forest rights claims, which includes the Gram Sabha Forest Rights Committee, the sub-divisional level committees, the district level committees, and state monitoring committees. The DAJGUA was launched in October 2024, which brings together 25 interventions. That is how the question is being framed in the prelims. Right? So use this particular information. 25 interventions of 17 line ministries. So it is an inter-ministerial coordination effort for targeted implementation in over 68,000 tribal dominated villages. One component of this particular program is to speed up the FRA implementation so that these tribals can have the rights over their land, the individual rights as well as the community rights. The operational guidelines for this particular mandate, that the FRA cells to help the quick disposal of the pending claims, especially the ones that have been held up even after the district level committee's approval. According to the latest available progress report from March 25, 14.45 of this particular 51.11 lakh FRA claims across 21 states and UTs remain pending. A lot of them are pending. Of the around 43 lakh claims that have been disposed of, 42% were rejected. So that is the kind of rejection rate which is there. So what we'll be doing is we'll talk about these tribes, their geographical expanse, and then we'll talk about the related challenges and the way forward and the government initiatives, right? It's going to be very comprehensive. Now, definition of tribes. As I told you that we have this particular section which has suffered economic exploitation, political exploitation, social exploitation, even cultural exploitation. And how we can say that? Because this particular community basically has certain specific traits. And on that basis, it suffered a lot of these exploitation because they primarily lived in the interior areas, in the interiors of deep forests. But because of the greed, especially of the British, and then after independence, of the resources, what happened? We basically exploited their areas, right? So what are their specific traits? For example, primitive agriculture practices, lack of infrastructure, and geographic isolation. That is what you have to understand. So considering these, the exploitation suffered by them, and the status of the development they have achieved, the constitution makers came up with the scheduled tribes, that is those tribes which are a part of the constitution, listed in the constitution. So we have article 342 subclause 1, which mandates that the president, after consultation with the governor, can basically, with respect to that particular state or a UT, declare a group of community or groups of community as scheduled tribes. Then we have article 342 subclause 2, which says Parliament has the power to basically include in or exclude out any of these STs from this particular list. I hope this is clear. Now, what is the criteria for the specification of a particular community as ST? See, the constitution doesn't talk about any criteria. What do you have to understand? We do not have any specific criteria on the basis of which is mentioned in the constitution, on the basis of which we designate a particular community as a ST community. That is what you have to understand. But there are certain traits which I already mentioned. For example, primitiveness, geographical isolation, let's say living in remote areas, in the hills. Then we have shyness and social, educational, economic backwardness. So on this particular basis, evaluating the performance of a community on these basis, we have the final inclusion of a particular community as the ST. Definitions of the tribal communities were basically sourced from the 1931 census, which you have to understand. Now, when we talk about the ST population, it's according to the 2011 census. It constitutes almost 8.6% of the total population, which is almost 10.4 crores. And this is according to 2011 census. That is what you have to understand. There are over 730 scheduled tribes in the country. And if you look at the geographical expanse, so we have this primary, the central belt, starting from Gujarat and parts of Maharashtra. Then see, we have Madhya Pradesh, we have Chhattisgarh, we have Jharkhand, we have parts of Odisha, and then look at the northeastern part dominated by the tribal groups, and then we have over here in Himachal Pradesh and Leh and Ladakh. So that is the kind of geographical expanse: the central belt, the eastern parts, the northeastern parts, and the northern part. That is what you have to understand. Now, this is the main part. What are the issues? The very first is demographic changes. Look at this map. See, through the map we will try to elaborate it. We have this Santhal Pargana division. Santhal Pargana division in the state of Jharkhand. Now, once you look at this particular area, there have been allegations that there has been a continuous rise of illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. And they are basically causing the demographic changes. Demographic changes in this particular area. And it's not just about this area. It's also about the other areas. The proportion of the STs in a particular area, that has slowly reduced. In fact, the Registrar General of India, in a particular report, also talked about this, that the proportion of the original inhabitants, it is decreasing from almost 50% to 24% in the Santhal Pargana region. So that is a cause of concern, right? Forced religious conversions. So we have already talked about this in earlier lectures, that there has been this aspect of forced religious conversions. See, if conversion is based upon someone's spiritual inclination, it's perfectly fine. But if the conversion is based upon the lure of money or something else, then that is a fraudulent conversion and that should not be allowed. Then we have land alienation and displacement. As I told you, because of economic development, mindless economic development, these areas have been exploited. According to Land Rights Alliance, from 1951, it's a non-governmental organization, Land Rights Alliance, almost 66 lakh of these original inhabitants, they have been removed from their original location because of these developmental related projects, right? So very important reason. Loss of livelihoods. What we are trying to say. See, these people, they are dependent upon crude livelihood options. Hunting, gathering. So shifting agriculture, for example. So once you uproot these people, they do not have those skills. They cannot join in and go and have any job in the market because they do not have the required skills. They are dependent upon crude livelihood options. Then we have environmental degradation. Once you uproot the forest just for mindless development, mindless exploitation of resources, it leads to environmental damage, degradation. Social disposition. One of the most important things which the tribals are associated with is the forest. They basically deem it sacred. For them, it is sacrosanct. But once you uproot them, they are basically dispossessed. That is what you have to understand. Lack of basic amenities and infrastructure. They are suffering from health issues. You must have heard about sickle cell anemia. So they have different genetic disorders. Very important cause of concern. Then we have limited education. There is no provision of adequate education facilities. There are no teachers. And therefore, the overall education outcomes or the educational attainment levels, they are low. When we talk about the literacy rates, for example, right, or the learning outcomes, poor healthcare access. The grassroots healthcare delivery systems in the tribal areas is not up to the mark. It is suffering. So that is one of the very important issues. Exploitation and marginalization. Yes. When we talk about this particular community, it is the one which is most vulnerable to trafficking, especially the girls and the women. Sometimes there are cases, horrific cases of sexual exploitation, and ultimately they're forced into prostitution. So this is a very serious concern. Then we have debt bondage. These people, they are unaware of these money lenders. They go and they borrow money. And then what happens is these money lenders basically charge usurious rates of interest, exorbitant rates of interest, very high rates of interest. So ultimately they are into a kind of a debt bondage. Then we have social exclusion. Imagine you have a particular tribal family living in a forest. Now that has been uprooted. Now it goes to an urban area. What happens over there is that these tribal people are looked on with suspicion. There is a stigmatization which is there. So again, what we see is that there is this aspect of social exclusion. There is the forced discrimination which is there. Then we have resource depletion and environmental degradation. As I told you, once you have these people being uprooted, ultimately it results into loss of biodiversity and also the livelihood insecurity. Then we have inadequate governance and representation. See, what you should know is that when we are talking about the participation of STs, definitely we have reservation in the House of People, in the legislative assemblies. But still what we see is only a particular section of the STs is able or is basically enjoying the fruits of affirmative action. For majority of the sections of the STs, they're not able, they're not even aware of this. So there is lack of voice, ineffective implementation of different policies. There is siphoning of the resources. There is corruption involved. The resources or the benefits which are ideally meant for the STs, they're not reaching there. And ultimately what is happening is because of the corruption, their health standards or their overall human life indicators, they're not improving. Now, what have been the government initiatives? The very first is, as I told you, we have the 5th schedule areas and the 6th schedule areas. Now, you need to tell me the 6th schedule areas are for which state? A very simple question. Then we have the special component plans and the tribal sub-plans. As a part of the budget, we have a specific component reserved for the tribal groups. That is what the tribal sub-plan is all about. Then we have educational development. We have different schemes, for example, the Eclave model residential schools. Or we have the scholarships, which is also given by the different state governments in order to increase the educational attainment of the STs. Then we have the economic development, different initiatives like Tribal Cooperative Marketing and Development Federation, TriFed. It basically makes sure that the products of these tribal groups, handmade goods, for example, it is properly marketed and they get the adequate return. Then we have skill development program. Let's say these tribals are being rehabilitated to some other regions. So they need to be given adequate skills so that they can join the mainstream. They can have their own livelihood options. So that is what the skill development aspect is all about. Then we have land rights and forest management. I already talked about the land rights. And we also have another very important act, which is PISA, Panchayat Extension to Schedule Areas. So we have the aspect of infusing the grassroots democracy in the 5th schedule areas. And for that, we have the PISA Act, right? Read about it. What should be the ways to basically reduce the tribal vulnerabilities and promote their development? The very first is strengthening of the existing laws. There is no dearth of laws in India. Laws are perfect. And I often say that when it comes to the planning and policy making, we are very good. But when it comes to the implementation part, there are loopholes. So obviously you must have also seen that there are people who make very good plans with respect to studying. But when it comes to the implementation, there are loopholes, right? So always have a short-term plan, execute it, and then realize your particular objectives. So we need to strengthen the existing laws, be it Forest Right Act or the PISA, we need to strengthen them. Community-driven planning. What I'm trying to say with respect to strengthening is the implementation part. Community-driven planning. These laws or these policies, they should not be top-driven. There should be a bottom-up approach. There has to be stakeholder mechanism. These tribal groups should be made an equal stakeholder with respect to the formulation of the policies, right? Next, we have focus upon sustainable livelihoods. For example, in tribal areas, what we can have is ecotourism, right? So again, if we provide, because that is something which is gaining attraction, people are more inclined to go for this ecotourism aspect. So that can be done. Improving the infrastructure and quality of education. That should be done because ultimately, be it digital connectivity, be it roads, be it rural infrastructure, that should be promoted, right? These areas are remote in nature. They do not have adequate healthcare facilities and therefore they have to bear most of the disease burden For example, genetic disorders. So that should not be happening. Minimizing their displacement, making sure that we have proper economic development, and they should not bear the cost of the economic development. That is, if you are, first make sure that you are not basically uprooting them. But if you want to basically, make them to shift to different location or rehabilitate them, make sure that there are adequate provisions. They are basically given the adequate skills. They are given the adequate resources. Right. Next aspect is transparency in the allocation and utilization of funds. The very objective is to have a system of efficient fund transfer. For example, we have the fund transfer system, or in fact, what we call as the public fund management system, PFMS. That should be made more robust so that we can have a system where there is the adequate transfer of money from the center to the states and ultimately to the district administration. Right? There should not be any siphoning of funds. What we are trying to say is that the conditions of the tribals have significantly improved, but still there are a lot of issues. And we need to focus upon that section of this STs, which is not even aware of the kind of benefits they have, right? So again, we need to incorporate these aspects. Let's have a mains practice question. The tribes in India suffer from various forms of deprivation and marginalization. Elaborate. Also highlight the measures taken by the government for their growth and development. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write an answer on this question. Coming to the simplified section, we have the very first topic, which talks about the Israeli attacks on Iran. Let's have the gist of the article. Iran is situated in a region which is geopolitically very tensed, full of chaos and conflict. And there are arch rivals present here. For example, the arch rival of Iran is Israel. And it also doesn't have good relations with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the other Sunni Muslim states. Now, what you have to understand is, in order to strengthen its security, there were allegations that Iran started enriching its uranium. What is enriching uranium? That is to prepare war-grade, nuclear bomb-grade uranium. Now, this was obviously not acceptable, especially to the Western countries. And they applied the pressure tactic on Iran. And ultimately, we had the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, primarily led by Barack Obama. Now, this made the relations more smooth. But what happened after Trump came to power? He basically came out of the JCPOA. And this gave reason to Iran to again enrich its uranium, which it always said that we are not doing it. But there have been suspicions, especially the International Atomic Energy Agency recently has found that Iran is not abiding by the kind of conditions which it should abide. So recently what we have seen is that Trump has been pressurizing Iran to stop enriching. And at the same time, we saw the preemptive strikes by Israel. And very devastating strikes have been carried out by Israel in Iran. And it has led to the killing of many of the military commanders, senior military commanders and top nuclear scientists of Iran. Now, again, this has made the region more tensed. There are chances of war, more serious war coming in this particular area. So in that particular context, you'll have to see this whole picture. That on one side, you have Israel getting the support of the Western countries, primarily the US. And US is also basically it's also coordinating. It's also having different mechanisms with Iran. It also wants to come to a deal. But this is a kind of the pressure which has been exerted by Israel. Let's see what happens. But this is the whole situation. And different places in Iran have been basically struck by Israel. For example, we have Tehran, we have Natanz, we have Isfahan, we have Arak, Kermanshah, Tabriz in Iran. So we say that most ambitious and military operations in recent years, Israel launched a serious airstrikes against Iran, targeting nuclear sites, missile facilities, and other military infrastructure. The attack killed some of the country's key military civilian personnel as well, whatever I said, right? Strikes came after the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors passed a resolution, this is important, declaring Iran as being non-compliant with its non-proliferation obligations. We have IAEA, which is basically mandated to go and conduct those inspections in different countries where there is a suspicion that they might be enriching the uranium. So what IAEA has said that Iran is non-compliant. It is not following the conditionalities which have been imposed. The first such resolution in 2 decades. Recent IAEA investigation found that Iran was conducting secret nuclear activities at 3 locations. Israel's preemptive strikes, before anything occurs, we do a strike. That is preemptive strike, right? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Iran had taken the steps that it has never taken to weaponize enriched uranium. And if not stopped, Iran could produce nuclear weapon in a very short time, perhaps even within a few months. Israel has always considered nuclear Iran to be existential threat. Again, this is important. Israel basically thinks that Iran is an existential threat to it. And we have people in Iran saying death to America, right? So this is the overall construct in which you'll have to see the picture. But recent strike, what this basically manifests is that Iran is basically going down in the power structure and it is not capable to basically retaliate. Notably, this latest development comes when Tehran and Washington are negotiating a deal that would prevent Iran from developing atomic weapons in exchange for sanctions relief. So already a negotiation is going on, but at the same time, we had the preemptive strikes by Israel. What did Israel target? In its attack, Israel claims to have deployed 200 aircrafts, a third of its active fleet, to hit more than 100 targets across Iran, both strategic infrastructure and key personnel, right? Different places have been struck. Natanz nuclear facility, one of the very important facilities in Iran. Iran's main uranium enrichment facility. I hope you know what is uranium enrichment. This is nothing but you are basically purifying and refining it more so as to create nuclear war-grade uranium, right? Bomb material. So for that, you need to have different applications and mechanisms, what we use as centrifuges, right? Where the country produces most of its nuclear fuel. Located in the central province of Isfahan, Natanz facility is the beating heart of Iranian nuclear program. Reviewing satellite images, according to the New York Times, say that the Israeli airstrikes had caused severe damage to the facility. Several buildings and critical energy infrastructure either destroyed or heavily damaged. It is still unclear whether these strikes damaged the all-important centrifuge halls, where the enriching takes place, where the uranium is enriched, buried deep under the Persian desert, protected by meters of reinforced concrete. So you have these facilities deep underground, reinforced by concrete, and above that you have deserts, right? The IAEA on Friday afternoon said that Israel had not yet struck Iran's other major nuclear enrichment plant at Fordo in northern province of Qom. This facility, unlike Natanz, is entirely underground and much harder to hit. That is what you have to understand. Next aspect is key personnel. Israeli strikes in Tehran took out Iran's top military leadership. Among those killed, we have the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, and this is more important, Chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, IRGC. You must have heard about Qasem Soleimani, right? So he was also the head of the IRGC. So that is what you have to understand. Most powerful institution in the country. These deaths leave a vacuum in Iran's military leadership of what may be a protracted regional conflict. Israel also killed the top nuclear scientists. This is not the first time that Israel has gone after the Iranian nuclear scientists. Earlier also it killed different nuclear scientists of Iran, but those were through covert operations, secret operations. But this is through the conventional military technique. First time that it has done through the conventional military means and not covert operation. Another significant casualty, especially in the light of the ongoing Iran-US nuclear talks, was this particular person, Ali Shamkhani, one of Iran's top politicians who was appointed by Khamenei to oversee the negotiations with Washington. Military infrastructure, Israel also targeted number of military sites across Iran. For example, we have the Nuclear Research Center and 2 military bases in Tabriz. Need not to remember, but just for the sake of understanding. A missile base in Kermanshah, multiple military bases in and around Tehran. Israel has maintained that its attack is ongoing. For now, Iran, this is possibly the gravest threat ever to the Islamic regime. In a letter to the UN Security Council, Iran Foreign Minister has said that Israel has now crossed every red line and that it would deeply regret its reckless aggression. Israel has painted a rather sorry picture of the Iran's military strength. Iran did send more than 100 drones in order to retaliate towards Israel, but there was no reported casualty or damage. Israeli strikes have seriously hurt its ability to strike back. So in order to strike back, you need to have adequate resources. But again, the kind of damages which have been inflicted by Israeli defense systems to Iran, they are huge. And therefore, Iran is now, what many commentators are saying, is not capable to respond. The biggest question is how Tehran will strike back. Put simply, Iran is caught between a rock and a hard place. It can activate its proxies, which it has done. For example, it has Hezbollah in Lebanon. It has other places, Houthi rebels in Yemen, right? Ever launched more drone and missile attacks, but Israeli attacks, muted responses from Tehran, repeatedly expose Iran's limitations. Israeli claims that Islamic regime in Iran poses an existential threat to the Jewish nation. The opposite might be more true. So what they're saying is that Israel thinks that Iran is an existential threat to it, but the opposite might be true. For Iran, Israel is an existential threat. At the end of the day, Tel Aviv stands with the steady support from Washington. That is, Israel has the support of US, which establishes a fundamental asymmetry between itself and Iran on the battlefield. US President Donald Trump, here comes Trump, on Friday said Israel's next already planned attacks could be even more brutal. Means he already has some idea what Israel is now going to do. And warned that Tehran must make a deal, the best part which Donald Trump can do, before there is nothing left. So that is what you have to understand. Let's have a look at the map of the region. These are the countries which are adjoining Iran. We have Afghanistan, we have Pakistan, we have Turkmenistan, we have Azerbaijan, some part of Armenia, Turkey, Iraq. We have these countries. That is what you have to understand. And yes, these are the important locations. For example, we have the Elbrus Mountains, possibly a question in the prelims can come. We have Zagros Mountains. We have Bandar Abbas Port over here. Over here, we have Chabahar Port, right? Chabahar Port, which you have to understand. We have Dasht-e-Lut Desert, Dasht-e-Kavir, and we have Isfahan and different places. Just have a glance through these images. Possibly a question can come. And yes, very important, Strait of Hormuz. Very, very important. Tell me where Strait of Bab el-Mandeb is. Right in the comment section. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to aspiration, choice, and demography. Let's look at the gist of the article. We have United Nations Population Fund. It has come up with a new report, State of the World Population Report. Now, see, we all know that there is a kind of a transition we are seeing in the overall demography. That is, the population is aging. We have more of a demographic dividend, the young population. Now, what these authors are trying to say is that whenever we talk about the transition in the demography, we mostly focus upon this part: aging population, demographic changes, the young population coming, and the kind of opportunities we have with respect to demographic transition. What they're saying is that we fail to basically accept the other important aspects. For example, let's take the case. Let's say we have a couple, and because of unintended pregnancies, what happened is that they have more of children than they actually intended. That is overachieved fertility. Then there can be parents who basically desire a child, but because of different economic situations, the kind of pressures they have, let's say because of employment, let's say the couple is not employed, or any of the couple is not employed, any one of them. So they would have to basically delay the choices with respect to the family planning. So that is what these authors are talking about. And this case is of underachieved fertility. Why we always focus upon controlling the population? What the authors are trying to say is focus upon reproductive agency. That is, give adequate rights to the women. Women are the ones who are bearing the brunt of both domestic responsibilities as well as the other responsibilities. So it has to be more equitable. That is what the gist of the article is, right? The UNFPA has released the State of the World Population Report 25. The topic is Real Fertility Crisis, the Pursuit of Reproductive Agency in a Changing World. The objective is the means and the mechanisms through which we can increase the overall ambit of rights, especially of women. As fertility rates decline worldwide, the crisis lies not in population numbers, but in unmet reproductive aspirations of women and couples. So not just look at the numbers, but the needs of the people, right? Gap between an individual's or couple's desires regarding children and family size and the social, cultural, or policy-driven expectations placed upon them. Concerns about population shifts are driving the demographic anxiety that is undermining the reproductive autonomy of the women globally, including India. Global demographics are transforming. Fertility rates are coming down on an average. World's population is projected to peak this century. The global fertility rate has decreased from around 5 in 1960 to 3.3 in 1990 and 2.2 in 2024. Fertility rates less than 2 are becoming the norm, that is less than the replacement level. With more than half of the world's countries accounting for more than 2/3 of the global population having a fertility rate below 2.1 births per woman. Now, this is something which tells that we are going towards lessening the population, right, below the replacement level. All countries will have a fertility levels less than 4 by 2054. In India, the national fertility rate declined from 2.9 in 2005 to 2 in 2020, the sample registration survey. Large interstate variations exist. The overall population of children under 5 peaked in 2004, a peak in the number of children and adolescents under 15 in 2009. These large cohorts of young people, combined with increasing expectancy and declining mortality rates, will continue to drive the population growth. So we have still large number of children, right? And they are going to basically drive the population growth in India. India's population projected to reach its peak in the middle of this particular century. As a part of the report, UNFPA conducted the online survey to better understand people's reproductive experience and challenges. A central finding was widespread unmet reproductive aspirations. Unmet reproductive aspirations, very important. Many individuals face obstacles both in avoiding unintended pregnancies and in having children when they want to. In India, over 36% of the respondents reported an unintended pregnancy, while over 30% were unable to have a child when they wished to. So you have to look at both these aspects, right? Dual challenge, that is underachieved fertility, where people have fewer children than desired, and overachieved fertility when they have more children than intended. The NFHS 5 says with 9.4% of the currently married women aged 15 to 49 reporting unmet need for family planning. Having or wanting children, the most commonly cited challenges were economic. What are the challenges, right? Why people are unable to have more of children, right? Because they might desire, but they cannot have because of the different challenges. For example, economic, ranging from financial insecurity and unemployment to inadequate housing and limited access to quality healthcare. These are compounded by social norms and unequal relationships within dynamics. We have basically had social revolution. Definitely, there is a kind of evolution which is being witnessed, but still there are entrenched notion of patriarchy in the society, and then that shapes the social relationships. Women report difficulty in finding a suitable partner and negotiating an equitable division of household and caregiving responsibility. When we talk about the responsibilities in the household, still we have our sisters and mothers who are basically doing a lot, right? And that burden is not being shared by the males, right? Marriage in India continues to place burden on women who are expected to manage the cooking, child rearing, and other domestic duties. Lack of supportive workplace policies such as paid parental leave, flexible hours, and childcare facilities further discourage women from balancing careers with family life. There is also a fear of career setbacks or discrimination due to pregnancy. And that is the reason, many people have this notion, many females have this notion that, if they will basically, have this aspect of family planning, right? If they would bear the child, then definitely their career would be at stake. So this is an important aspect, right? For many women in the informal sector, these supportive policies do not exist. A growing number of women and couples are also experiencing hesitation about raising children in difficult global environment. There is also this particular concern. Many people do not want to have kids because what they're saying is that there is so much of challenges in this particular world. For example, climate change, increasing temperatures, and therefore they have basically decided not to go with childbearing, right? It's important to address the infertility and issue stigmatized in India. Marriage is often equated with childbearing. That is the problem in Indian society. So marriage is associated with childbearing. And this aspect of infertility is also something which is stigmatized, right? Despite advances in healthcare, many women still face barriers in accessing maternal care and reproductive health information. For couples struggling with infertility, the options are often limited, expensive, poorly regulated. Treatments are dominated by the private players. You must have seen these IVF clinics dominated by the private players. High costs combined with lack of insurance cover. So they are prohibitively expensive. Reproductive agency is further constrained by the widespread reliance on sterilization. Now, see, sterilization, all right, we understand. To control the fertility, it's fine. But there has to be a choice. There has to be importance given to the choice of the women. It should not be forced. That is what the authors are trying to say. Encouraging access to reversible, modern contraception methods, not just for birth control, but also to preserve choice, is essential to ensure people so that they can plan families. Another challenge lies in changing patterns of childbearing. Early childbearing is on the decline, with more women choosing to have children later in life. Because of the delayed marriage, their education and delayed marriage, they're having children at later ages. However, when it comes to second child, spacing practices, that is the time difference between the first child and the second child, critical for maternal, child and societal health, are overlooked. According to NFHS, 4% of the currently married women aged 15 to 49 report unmet needs for spacing. That is, they're not basically, see, there has to be adequate spacing, because if you want to provide the nutritional aspect to the women, right? So it takes a huge toll on the body of the women. So what we're trying to say is there has to be adequate spacing, and also the NFHS data specifies this aspect. This is shaped by the social norms that discourage contraceptive use and preference for a male child. These factors undermine women's reproductive autonomy. The stigma around the family planning conversations need to be dismantled. It has to be made a part of the regular conversations. These conversations are really important, right? And in order to basically have a more evolved aspect, we need to basically discuss these important things. Rising demographic anxiety stems not from unforeseen developments, but from a failure of planning and policy foresight. Discourse is dominated by concerns about aging population, declining fertility rates, in some cases overpopulation, yet what people themselves want for fertility, families, and future continues to be ignored. So you'll have to take the individual at the center stage. Proactive perspective to engage women, families, and communities around the reproductive autonomy through informed choices by centering reproductive policies on people's aspiration rather than controlling their choices. We can move towards a model of demographic resilience and a future rooted in dignity, equity, and reproductive autonomy. So this is to focus upon the rights, the reproductive agencies of the women and the couple. Look at this, can be important. We have the United Nations Population Fund. It's the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, founded in 1969, originally as this. Its mission: every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. Core domains, these are the domains you can have a look: family planning and contraceptive access, maternal health, gender-based violence, and we have global outreach, currently operates in over 150 countries. Key milestones: historic roots, born in 69, guided strongly by the 994 CARO International Conference on Population and Development, 1994, important conference. Principles emphasizing rights-based population policy. This is important. Reports to the UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, and the Executive Board and ECOSOC. Fully funded by the voluntary contributions from the governments, foundations, private sector, individuals. And we have this particular report, New Fertility Report of 2025, and the State of the World Population Report being published by UNFPA. Just remember, let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the installation of new air quality monitoring stations. Now, we know that we are suffering from this menace of pollution. Now, in order to have adequate and robust policies with respect to the mitigation of the pollution, we need to have adequate data sources. From where the data would come, the real-time data, it would be through the air quality monitoring system, right? And it is in that regard that Delhi is basically coming up with new air quality monitoring systems. Delhi is set to expand its air quality monitoring infrastructure with the installation of 6 new continuous ambient air quality monitoring stations, CAA-QMS. Targeting areas not typically associated with high pollution. The expansion led by Delhi Pollution Control Committee is a part of ongoing efforts to develop a more granular understanding of the pollution patterns across different urban environments. At present, Delhi has 40 CAA QMS and 7 manual stations. 26 have been set up by Delhi Pollution Control Committee, while the others have been set up by India Meteorological Department. Then we have the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, and we have CPCB. The new stations would improve geographic coverage and bring under observation several areas that are not traditionally seen as pollution hotspots. What is the National Air Quality Index? So we have Air Quality Index is a tool for effective communication of air quality status. See, understand that there are different pollutants. For example, we have sulfur dioxide, we have carbon monoxide, we have lead. Now, in order to make the general people understand what is the level of pollution, we have this air quality index. That is through a color-coded index, through a simple number, you can understand that the pollution is too much or the pollution is low, right? That is what the air quality index is all about. In terms which are easy to understand, it transforms the complex air quality data of various pollutants into a single number, index value, nomenclature, and color. You can just have a look. These are different colors. There are 6 AQI categories, namely good, satisfactory, moderately polluted, poor, very poor, and severe. 6 categories. Each of these categories is decided based upon the ambient concentration of various air pollutants and their likely health impact, known as health breakpoints. AQ subindex and health breakpoints are evolved from 8 pollutants. What are these 8 pollutants? Particulate matter 10, particulate matter 2.5, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, ammonia, and lead. Do remember, important, lead is also a part of this. For short term, up to 24 hours under the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which are prescribed. And this is nothing but prescribed by the CPCB. That is what you have to understand. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to India's abstention from a very important UNGA resolution with respect to Gaza ceasefire. The gist of the article is that India has, in this particular UNGA resolution, has abstained from voting. Now, this is after December 2024. Where India basically said yes for a ceasefire. What you have to understand is this particular action, the abstention, is basically seen as a move which is more in favor of that of Israel. Many critics are basically having this allegation. But what you have to understand is that India has always stood for a two-state solution when we talk about Israel and Palestine. That is, it gives due regards to the Palestinians and the Israelis. That is what you have to understand. Now, we have the External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, who is in France, and what is being expected is that there's going to be a conference organized by the French foreign minister, the two-state conference. But US, on the other hand, has basically sent notices, demarche to different countries around the world that do not participate in this particular conference because it is more in line with Israelis and it doesn't want a two-state solution. That is what you have to understand. India abstains from a UN General Assembly resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza for the fourth time in 3 years, indicating the growing trend in the Modi government's policy not to vote on statements critical of Israel's bombardment of Gaza, in which more than 55,000 people have already been killed. India voted in favor of UNGA resolution for a ceasefire in December 2024. This latest move, marks a significant departure from India's position just 6 months ago. French Foreign Minister, we have Indian Foreign Minister in France, and we have the French Foreign Minister who is expected to request a high-level participation from India for a UN conference on creating conditions for a two-state solution. A leaked demarche report by the US media, the Trump administration has warned the US doesn't want a two-state solution, has warned partner countries not to join the conference or to make pledges for the recognition of Palestine. India recognized Palestine in 1988 and is among 147 of the 193 UNGA countries that have already recognized Palestinian state. The resolution at the UNGA on Thursday evening was introduced by Spain, and applause broke out in the assembly as it was passed by more than 4/5 of all countries. India was one of the 19 abstentions. The US voted with Israel and 10 other countries against the resolution. India was the only country in the South Asia, BRICS, or the SCO group to abstain from this particular voting. This is what you need to know with respect to India's position. Let's go to the last article of the day. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to a very important body, which is the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau. So what the article says is that one of the black boxes has been found in the crash site in Ahmedabad, and AIB would now be investigating it, right? So what it says, one of the black boxes of the Air India Boeing 787-8 aircraft has been recovered from the crash site. Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau is leading the investigation into the worst aviation disaster involving an Indian airline in decades. Let us talk about this particular body. Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, part of the Ministry of Civil Aviation. It is an attached office of the Government of India, Ministry of Civil Aviation. AIB has the responsibility to fulfill the obligations of the state under the Annex 3 of the Convention on the International Civil Aviation signed at Chicago. AIB is responsible for the classification of safety occurrences involving aircraft operating. So you have a classification of the aircrafts, and if unfortunately there's an accident which happens, then it investigates. After completion of the investigation and acceptance of the same by the Director General AIB, the investigation reports are made public and published by the AIB on its website. The accepted final investigation reports are also forwarded to the International Civil Aviation Organization. Do read about it. And the states participating in the investigation. AIB also conducts safety studies from time to time. The recommendations made in the investigation reports and the safety studies are forwarded to the DGCA, Directorate General of Civil Aviation, India, or civil aviation regulatory bodies or other ICAO contracting states for the implementation. So this is what you need to know. Know that it's an attached body. It's an attached body of Ministry of Civil Aviation. So that is it from my side. Before we end the session, let us pay our condolences to the departed soul of this tragic crash in Ahmedabad. May their souls rest in peace. That's it from my side. All the very best. Thank you so much.